Be'ez Hashem Baruch we begin Perek Achad Asa, the 11th and final chapter in Rambam Mishneh Torah, Laws of Blessing, the Safe Hava Book of Love, which in this parak we discuss the Birchas HaMitzvahs, blessings that are made on the performance of mitzvahs. As Rambam gives halacha regarding the different types of blessings. Kol HaBarachas Kul, and all the blessings, Pesach ben bebarach, you open up with a baruch, V'chis ben baruch, and you end over the baruch. That's generally what the bracha is going to be. Chutz mi bracha achreina shel Kriya Shema, except for, let's say, the last blessings of Kriya Shema, which is Emes V'yatzev, which does not open with a baruch, and so to a bracha asmucha lechaverta. When you have a bracha that's near a previous bracha, like for example, all the brachas of Shemoneh Esrei, which don't start with a bracha because the first bracha of Shemoneh Esrei already started with a baruch, and that's also why the bracha of Kriya Shema does not start with a baruch, because even though Kriya Shema is in between, it's considered smucha lechaverta of the brachas before Kriya Shema. And that's for one reason. And you have the blessings of Peretz, which is similar to it, like all the brachas and then because they're very short. So there also you'll only start with a baruch, you won't end with a baruch. Brachas asiyas mitzvahs, or the bracha on the performance of mitzvahs, which also only starts with a baruch. Ve'ela bracha shemarnu, regarding the brachas that we mentioned in the previous parak, which are ways of praise and thanksgiving. Yesh min pesach bebaruch. Some start with a baruch, ve'nechesim bebaruch, as we just mentioned, that you could have certain brachas hashavach that will open and not end with a baruch, and which was we mentioned in the previous parak. Then you could have those who would end with a baruch and don't start with a baruch, like for example the bracha on rain. Now you do have, in other words, there are some of the brachas mitzvahs which are not in this category. Could go in brachas sefer Torah. For example, the bracha on by kriyas HaTorah, where the bracha before the aliyah and after the aliyah, which actually start and end with a bracha, although most brachas mitzvahs don't have both. And V'roi Kivri Yisrael, and when someone sees the graves of the Jewish people, which me'elu shein derech shevach v'hadoyah, which are from those that are from the berachas hashevach v'hadoyah, which in other words there are also from berachas hadoyah that also are removed from the category. For example, when you see a Jewish grave, also starts and ends with a bracha. Now, but all the other berachas mitzvahs, all of them, pesach ben baruch, you'll only open up with a baruch, but the will not end with a baruch at the end. Halacha beis. Yesh mitzvahs say there are certain positive commandments that a person has to attempt to chase it until he performs it. For example, tefillin, wearing tefillin, besukah, sitting in a sukkah, lulav, shuckling, lulav, shayfer, blowing a shayfer, listening to a shayfer. These are what's called obligatory, because the person has an obligation at least to do them. Now, there are certain mitzvahs that are not obligatory. They're very similar to being optional. For example, mezuzah makkah, putting a mezuzah on one's doorway and putting a fence around on one's roof. Why is it optional, although it's really obligatory? Because you don't have to live in a house that would obligate you in mezuzah. Kadesh has mezuzah that you have to make mezuzah. But because if a person wants to, if he wants to live all his days in a tent, or between on the boat, which is not mechayiv in mezuzah, he could dwell over there. And so to bechein in the chayiv live in his bayis. Doesn't have to build a house kedelas makkah that'll have to make a fence on his roof. So therefore, in a way, they're considered optional. Now, now any mitzvah that's between man and God, which to the exception of benod lachaveroi. So bein mitzvah she'ein chayiv, whether it's a mitzvah that's not obligatory, bein mitzvah she'chayiv, whether it's a mitzvah that is obligatory, which we just mentioned those two categories. You make a blessing on it before you perform the ma'aseh of the mitzvah. Now, Allah will discuss regarding a blessing on a rabbinic mitzvah. So too, all mitzvahs that are from rabbinic law, whether it's a mitzvah that's a rabbinic obligation, could go Mikra Megillah, reading the Megillah on Purim, Vadlukas Ner Shabbos, and lighting the candles for Shabbos, Vadlukas Ner Chanukah, lighting the Chanukah lights. Or whether a mitzvah that's not obligatory, could go, for example, Eruv, where if you want to be able to carry, or in the Tilas Yadayim, when you want to eat, where they're not obligatory because you don't have to carry in something on Shabbos, so you won't need an Eruv. And if you don't want to eat something that will require washing, for example, you just eat fruits, so you won't have to wash your hands. Mevarach, either way, you make the blessing on all of these before you perform the Maisa Mitzvah. You make the bracha that Hashem sanctified us in His commandments, but He commanded us to do whatever that mitzvah is. Now, where did He command us in rabbinic mitzvahs? But in the Torah, it says, it says, that which they tell you, the sages, that's what you should do. Nimtza comes out in Hadvarim. The idea of this concept, Batsoin, and the way it comes out, Kachu, is as like this. The blessing means that he sanctified us in his commandments, that he commanded us with them, to listen from these what they commanded us. That's what the bracha would be, let's say, to light the candle of Chanukah, or Likras Megillah, or to read the Megillah. All other rabbinic mitzvahs, the same idea. Hashem commanded us in that pasuk to then do this mitzvah or that mitzvah. We say you make a bracha before you wash your hands before the meal. Why don't you make a bracha on the washing the hands, what's called mayim achreinim, at the end of the meal? That's also a rabbinic institution. Because this obligation of the sages was only because of danger. With the things that are because of danger, you don't make a blessing of them. What could you compare it to? The Mishnah seen this Someone, let's say, he's sifting out the water, and then he's drinking balayla at nighttime, where you can't see, and he's sifting it, and these sakanas are because of the danger of a leech, which could be dangerous to the person's intestines. Shein Mavarch doesn't not make a blessing, that the sages commanded us to sift the water. Because it's just they want you to stay healthy, and if you don't make a bracha on anything that's to prevent danger, anything something like that, and if that includes mayim achreinim, not to make a bracha. Regarding the blessing and regarding the performance of the mitzvah. So if someone does the ma'aseh mitzvah, does the action of the mitzvah, and he didn't make a bracha, so it depends. In mitzvah shadai nasiyasa kayem, if it's a mitzvah that its action is still being maintained, so you make the blessing even though you already did the mitzvah. But if it's something that you already did, it's already passed, it's in the past tense, you're not going to make a blessing. So, okay, so what does that mean? Let someone cloaked himself with his tzitzis, or he put on his tefillin, or he's sitting in the sukkah. He didn't make a bracha before he performed the mitzvah. Okay, he'll go back and make the blessing after he already put on his talis. If it's the one that Hashem sanctified us in his commandments, and he commanded us to cloak ourselves in the tzitzis, because you're in the middle of performing it right now. Every second is another part of the performance. You make the blessing after you put on to put on tefillin. That after you already set to sit in the sukkah. Anything that's something like that where you're still doing it, you can still make the blessing. Let's say someone slaughtered an animal without making the blessing. You cannot go back after the slaughtering and make the blessing. Hashem sanctified his commandments and commanded us on the slaughtering. It's already done, something in the past. So if you cover the blood of those chay and oif after the slaughtering, you have to cover the blood. You already did the covering without a blessing. Or if it's truma ma'aser, you already separate trumas and ma'aser without a blessing. Or someone went to table in the mikvah, did not make the bracha, so you can't go now make the blessing after it's already done. It's already done. Anything similar like that. For example, let's say he's mekadesh a woman without making berachas erison, you can't do it. It's already something in the past. Halacha zayin. Because there's no mitzvah that you make a blessing after you did it. There's one exception. Only the immersion of a convert. That's one exception, because there you cannot make the blessing. Hashem sanctified us in his commands and commanded us to regarding the tefillah, because Shatan in the Skadish, he has not yet been sanctified to be considered part of the Jewish people. But in 7, he hasn't been commanded on the mitzvahs until he first immerses, and then he's a Jew. After he immerses, then he'll make the blessing on the tefillah, because he was rejected from the beginning. But he was not able to make a blessing then. So there is one exception, that you can make the bracha on the tefillah after the immersion. Now, any mitzvah that its action is the conclusion of the obligation, so you make the blessing at the time of the performance. Now, but any mitzvah that after its action there's another commandment following on that, then you only make the blessing only at the time when you do the last commandment. So, someone makes the sukkah, he builds the sukkah, a lulav, or he makes the lulav, a shayfer, or the shayfer, he tzitzis, tefillin, mezuzah, whatever it is, he makes this holy object, which is part of the mitzvah. It does not make the blessing when he's making the sukkah. That Hashem sanctified us in the commandments, and he commanded us to make a sukkah, a lulav, to put together a lulav, a licht the film, to write film. Because after that action, there's another commandment, which is to actually now do that mitzvah, which is to shakal the lulav, to sit in the sukkah, etc., blow the shofar. So when you make the blessing, at the time when he's going to sit in the sukkah, when he shakes the lulav, when he listens to the sound of the shofar, says that when he cloaks himself with his talis, and when he puts on the tefillin, and when he actually puts on the mezuzah on the doorway. But if he makes a fence for his roof, Then he'll make the blessing at the time of when he puts it up, which is the mitzvah, not the actual being on the roof. Then he'll make the blessing to make a fence. Anything that's similar to that, for example, milo shchita. Then we said then you do it at the time when you're doing the action. Halacha tes, kol mitzvah shemizman l'zman. Any mitzvah that comes from year to year, from time to time. For example, Shofar comes on Rosh Hashanah, B'Sukkah, on Sukkot, B'Lulav, Megillah comes on Chanukah, on Purim, Ner Chanukah, the candlelights of Chanukah. V'chein kol mitzvah shekinyan lai. So to any mitzvah that's an acquisition for him, which therefore it's not less than buying new vessels, which you make a shechayanu. So you're also, when it's an acquisition of a mitzvah, buying tzitzis, tefillin, mezuzah, makkah. So to any mitzvah that's not constant, it's not at all times. It's like a mitzvah that comes annually. For example, milas b'noi, the circumcision of a son, the pinya ben, redeeming the firstborn son. It comes only after 9 months and 8 days, and so to pinya ben. So then you make the blessing at the time when you're performing it, shechayanu, which is something of excitement that comes annually. Now, if you did not make the blessing on the sukkah or the lulav shechayanu when you made it, so then you'll make the shechayanu on it when you're fulfilling your obligation in sitting in the sukkah and chuckling lulav, anything like similar like that. Or for example, tzitz and tefillin, that's when you make the shechayanu. Halacha yod regarding the text of the blessing. Echad of the when you on the berachos hamitzvos. Echad oisa mitzvah atzmai. Whether someone is doing a mitzvah for himself, or echad oisa lachem, or whether someone's doing the mitzvah for someone else. For example, let's say he's putting up a mezuzah on his friend's house. He makes the blessing before he does the action. And he makes the blessing Hashem sanctified us in the commandments and commanded us to do whatever that mitzvah is. But it does not make the blessing shechayanu, only if a mitzvah is doing for himself. Now, the fun of mitzvahs hard, but let's say he had in front of himself many mitzvahs to do. Does not make the like a umbrella blessing that bless Hashem, that sanctified us and commanded us on the mitzvahs. No, rather make a blessing on each one individually for that specific mitzvah. Whoever does a mitzvah, whether it's an obligation on him, whether it's not an obligation on him, for example, like mezuzah makkah, as we mentioned in halacha beis. If he's doing it for himself, he makes the blessing la'asais, to do, meaning stipulating that he makes the bracha before he does it, as we're going to see in halacha tezvav. If he's doing it for others, then the makes the blessing not la'asais, to do, but al ha'asiyah, on that action, meaning la'asais sounds like that he's obligated to do it. Al, on that action, whatever it is, sounds like that's for others. So therefore, then he's going to actually make a different text of a blessing. Halacha beis, as Rabbi explains, kitzur haso. So love tefillin, someone's putting on tefillin that he's doing for himself. Mevarach makes the blessing lo hanich tefillin, to put on the tefillin. The Zat says he's putting on his talus. Mevarach makes the blessing lehisatif, to cloak. Yoshev besuk, when he's sitting in the sukkah. Mevarach makes the blessing leishav besukah, to sit in the sukkah. V'chein, so too, who Mevarach makes the blessing lahadik ner shel Shabbos, to light the candles of Shabbos, to beligmer sal, and to finish the hal. V'chein cover mezuzah basis. Someone's putting up a mezuzah for his own house. Mevarach makes the blessing likboy mezuzah, to attach the mezuzah. Asamakal he's making a fence for his roof. To make a fence. Hefish truma he's separating truma for his own produce. He makes the bracha lahafish, to separate. Molas b'nai, he's circumcising his son. He makes the blessing lo molas aben, to circumcise the son. If he's slaughtering his own karban pasach and his own karban chagiga, he makes the blessing lishchit, to slaughter. Now halacha gimel of mkav mezuzah lachem, but let's say he's putting a mezuzah by someone else. Then Mebarcha does not make the bracha, as we said before, lik boya mezuzah. It's al kaviyas mezuzah. It's on the putting up of the mezuzah, of attaching the mezuzah. Aslem makkah, let's say he makes a fence for someone else. Mebarcha makes the blessing al asiyas makkah, on the making of a fence. Hefesh truma, if he separates from the truma, Mebarcha makes the blessing al afrashas truma, on the separating the truma. Molas ben chavev circumcises his friend's son. Mebarcha makes the blessing al amila, on the circumcision, because again he's only an agent of the father to fulfill the father's obligation. It's the primary mitzvah on the father. So you say al. Anything similar like that, you'll say al. Now let's say he's doing the mitzvah for himself and for others together as one. So if it was a mitzvah that's not obligatory, then he makes the blessing al, on that action. Then he's going to make the blessing al mitzvah erev, on the mitzvah of erev, because erev is not just for yourself, it's actually to carry from other people, so it's obviously including others, so you can make the blessing always al. Now, let's say something that was obligatory, because Erev, we said, is not obligatory, you don't have to carry. So let's say something that's obligatory. And his intent was to fulfill his obligation and others' obligations. Mevorcha makes the blessing la'asos, to do, because ultimately it's for his own obligation, even though it's including others. Lefikach makes the blessing lishmai kol shofar, to hear the sound of the shofar. So even though he's blowing the shofar for the whole community, it's his own chiyuv, and he's including others with that. He'll make the blessing of the action la'asos. Halacha tezvav. Not till es lulav. Let's say someone takes the lulav, mevorcha makes a blessing al netilas lulav. Why here is it al? Why doesn't it say lital halulav? Because Shekivin Shegibiyah, once he lifted it up, Yotzi Dechavasi. He fulfills his obligation. Now, in spite of this, he's still going to make a bracha because ultimately he's still engaged in the mitzvah because he has to shake it when he's going to recite hal. But yeah, if he makes the blessing before he takes the lulav, then Mevacha make the blessing, Lita lulav, to take the lulav, like you make the bracha to sit in the sukkah. So Mekana Talamet, from here you learn, as we're describing regarding lulav, someone makes the blessing after he already did the mitzvah, but the mitzvah continues. For example, let's say wearing a talis and you didn't make a bracha beforehand. Mevarch al hasiyeh, he'll make the blessing on the doing, not la hasiyeh, but al. Now, regarding washing one's hands or regarding slaughtering, and since they're in the category of voluntary optional things, because you don't have to eat meat, so you won't have to slaughter, which is even more inferior than mezuzah and a fence, because although they're not obligatory, but they're considered more distinct, more than these things are optional, and therefore you'll make a bracha of lasis, like we said in halacha yud aleph. Here, even if he's slaughtering for himself, you make the blessing on the slaughtering, va'al kisadem, and on the covering of the blood, va'al netizdem, and on the washing hands, because it's optional. So even for yourself, you won't make the bracha of lasis, but rather al asiyah. And that's the blessing he makes al bir chametz, on the getting rid of the chametz. And that's ben shabbat glasma, whether he's checking the chametz for his own property, ben shabbat lachem, whether he's checking for others. Why? Because it's more inferior. Because the moment the person made up his mind that he's going to nullify whatever chametz he has, nas's mitzvah sabir, so the mitzvah of getting rid of the chametz was already done before you even checked for it. Like we'll explain in its place in Hilchos Chametz Matzah Perek Beis Halacha Aleph, and therefore it's considered more inferior, like it's not something that's of substance, and therefore you'll make the bracha al asiyah and al lasais. Halacha design regarding a blessing on a minig, anything that's a custom. Although it's like a very important custom, a custom of the prophets, which they didn't institute for the people, they just had that conduct and the people followed after them. For example, the taking of the willow branch, we call Hishan the Rabbah, on the Hishan is on the 7th day of Sukkot. Enough to say, let's say it's just a custom of the sages, not of prophets. For example, reciting Hal on Rosh Chodesh, of a Chol Shemayim Pesach, or a Chol Moed of Pesach, which is only rabbinic, of a custom. So on these customs, you're not going to make a blessing on it. So to anything that you're not sure if it requires a blessing or not, for example, let's say sitting in the sukkah on the 8th day in the diaspora, which is maybe the 7th day, maybe the 8th day, or let's say covering the blood of a koi, which is maybe a chai, maybe behema. So you do it without making a blessing, so you don't violate taking God's name in vain. A person should always be careful regarding a blessing which is unnecessary, not to make a blessing if it's not necessary. At the same time, then he should increase the blessings which are necessary. David says in Tillim, every single day I bless you. So it's a good thing to make the blessings that are necessary, but not if they're unnecessary. We have concluded halachas of brachas, of blessings with siyat d'shmaya.